Hello and welcome to Clickbait. I am Matt and this is an Olympus XA which I'm going to talk to you about for a few minutes. Now, you know the phrase, what's the best camera in the world? And the answer is the one in your pocket. This is where this comes in. Before the days of camera phones, everyone had a real film camera at home. Maybe a fancy SLR if you're into photography, or certainly just a small cheap point and shoot of some kind. But for those people who wanted a serious but seriously small camera, Olympus gave us one of the smallest and best compacts in history. Just look at this thing. It is absolutely tiny. There's only a few controls, but they're all exactly where they need to be, and it fits perfectly in your hand. Now the XA series, the first XA, was designed in 1979 by Olympus's chief designer Yoshihisa Maitani, and he also gave us the Pen, OM and Mu series cameras as well. All camera legends in their own right, and I actually took my most profitable ever stock photo, possibly photo in fact, on a Mu camera once upon a time, but that's another story. There are actually several generations of XA and they're all slightly different, but we're going to focus today on the XA-2 because this is the Goldilocks point in the range that I've settled on as being the one that I like for the way I like to work. At the heart of it is a fixed 35mm f2.8 lens, although that later became an f3.5 on later models. It's a really useful focal length for doing pretty much everything from portraits to street photography to architecture and landscapes. I'll flick you through some photos up here in a minute of various things that I've shot on this camera, which have all come out, or mostly, relatively well, but we'll come to that in a moment. When it's used right, it is incredibly sharp. A defining feature of Olympus compacts for years has been their jaw-dropping quality from tiny bits of glass. Now there were 5 versions of the XA. The first one, the XA itself, sold from 1979 to 1985. Then the XA1 through to the XA4 were very similar but with incremental improvements and various changes through the years. The XA was fixed focus but had an aperture priority control. The XA1 lost that and got a selenium meter and an f4 lens. The XA2, this one, has a 35mm f2.8 but it has a 3-point slider for focusing for close-up, mid-range and distance, so it's pretty easy to set up for focusing. The XA2 ran from 1980 to 1985, then in 1985 the XA3 came out, which is basically the same but also got DX film speed programming, so instead of having to use the little slider underneath the lens to set that, it did it automatically. And finally in 1985, the last year of production, the XA4 came out, again very similar, but it gained backlight compensation, so a little bit of exposure compensation on there, so each time an incremental improvement. But there aren't many other controls on it. Open the little clamshell up, and on the XA2 it reveals the ISO setting and a little click over slider for your flash turning on offer, if that is attached on the side, because there were a couple of different flash options of different power output, making it more versatile because you could choose a really powerful flash, a relatively powerful flash, or no flash at all if you just wanted the convenience of a tiny camera. On the back of it you just have one single control, and that's your film advance, and on top you have a small readout for your frame number, mechanical obviously, a finger pad for shutter release, and of course a film rewind control here on the left hand side. Nothing on the back, nothing on the ends, and underneath you have a button to start rewinding it and a switch for self timer and battery check, which you can hear there. And you've got a proper screw thread so you can use it on a tripod for slower shutter speeds. It is absolutely tiny. It's a 200-gram camera without film, so weighs virtually nothing. Takes a couple of tiny little watch type batteries underneath, and it is just so versatile. All the XAs are rangefinder cameras, so you have a slight amount of parallax, but generally it's not too much of a problem. All the XAs were rangefinder cameras, so you have a separate viewfinder to the lens, so there's a tiny bit of parallax, but because it's directly above the lens, not too much, none of the angly stuff, not too much. Both the lens and the viewfinder are hidden by the clamshell and kept protected when it's in storage, and there's also a small sensor for the light meter. It's just a brilliantly simple camera to use. Just pull it out of your pocket, slide open the clamshell, wind on the film if you haven't already, and choose whether something is close up, middle range or far away, and frame and hit the button. So simple and quick. Because it's a 3-zone system, you're not trying to find critical focus, it's just finding approximately the right place. And generally it gets it quite right. I'll talk you through some photos in a moment. Okay, so here are some pictures actually shot with the XA itself. And And this is a really good starting point to talk about the thing, because I shot this exact same picture on a modern digital mirrorless camera, and it has got incredible definition. Like, you can zoom in on the windows of this house over here and virtually read what they've got on the TV in the background. This has a completely different feel, more of an ethereal, magical feel to it. There's a bit of grain to the picture. This is Fomapan 200, but it was scanned here on a Minolta Scan Elite 5400. Quite an old scanner, but still does a relatively good job. It's picked out the grain in the film pretty well. But looking inside there, you can actually see a lot of detail, and this is where the film grain is falling apart before the resolution of the lens does. Distance focus, and it's done a great job of just resolving lots of contrast, things where they need to be sharp. The grain and the lens resolution, all that kind of stuff, just work to make it really nice. Now looking at this image here, which zooming in, you can see it's chosen a bit of a slow shutter speed, and we've got some nice blur in the water, but we've also got incredible crispness on these decking planks on this little jetty. This is just proving the point. This camera has been all over the place, just stuffed in a pocket or in the side of a bag, just fits in and it's there. Because it's program only, it chooses the aperture, it chooses the shutter speed, you just choose where to send the focus to. In this case, I'd have chosen close-up focus, so we've got this area here crisp, but a nice bright day, so it's got nice depth of field to closing the lens down, so the mountains are sharp as well. And because we've got the vertical parallax rather than an offset, you can frame this quite neatly too. Moving down, this one almost worked perfectly. Unfortunately, I think the camera was set to distance focus rather than close-up focus, so the mountains are sharp in the background. We've got the boat coming in here, but under the Portese sign. Not quite crisp as I would like. The lady on here looks sharpish until you zoom in. And it's just a tiny bit soft, so it's not always 100% perfect, but it is a tiny pocket film camera, so you can't expect everything to be amazing. However, this is a good illustration. It's a big open space, it's a huge lake, apart from the fact I didn't quite get the horizon straight. What you can see here though is the lack of extreme bowing and barreling on the lens, because this horizon is really very straight indeed, apart from my angle of it obviously, which gives you an idea of the quality and the lack of distortion you get out of this camera. Again though, I shot the same photo on a digital camera and it's very crisp and very real, but this has just got a little bit more of a, I don't know, painterly quality that you don't really get with a modern camera. So moving through, it does give you nice contrast, that lens. This particular film I haven't shot with much before, so it's quite an interesting thing to see how it's coped with different situations. This was quite dark when I took this, but luckily these two guys stood still enough not to blur. One old guy talking to the other guys. This is kind of street photography with water, river photography you might want to call it. This is another illustration of the definition and the contrast that this lens will resolve. These bulrushes are just fantastic. These bulrushes just stand out perfectly against the highlights on the lake. One thing though I have found is I'm not sure if this is a finger coming across the front or what. Maybe it's a bit of my coat, who knows, but I've found this a couple of times on various frames. Now this is a great example of how good this camera can be when the lighting is just right and everything falls into place for it and it's working as it likes. This is a military vehicle show, I think, set to close focus, fill the frame, and everything is so crisp and clear, and it kind of actually suits the 1940s vibe of the trucker as well. Now this is one of my favourite pictures I've taken on this camera. This is some reenactment people firing a big old cannon in the woods, and the smoke from the cannon has caught the sunlight coming through the trees and filtering through, and it's got these beautiful shafts of light in the background. And because they were in the period dress from like 100 and something years ago, it all just kind of works really nicely. The grain, the soft light, and the camera has done a brilliant job of making the thing look and feel just nice. Set to close or medium focus, it's actually slightly sharper on this tree in the foreground than it is on them. There is no sensor in there, it's purely mechanical on that slider, so it's down to you as the user to hit that point. But you can use that to your advantage. This one, the fence going off into the distance, the perspective is really nice, but we've also got these rows of vines disappearing off as well. Setting this to foreground focus, we've got the fence looking really sharp, and you can use that to your advantage if you want to pick something in the foreground to be sharp. So you've got the fence separating this field from that field, and it kind of makes a point about how the farmer's chosen to keep people away from the vines. which are ever so slightly soft in comparison. A few more pictures here just showing how versatile the thing is. So here we have a countryside walk. Just pop the camera out of your pocket, grab that shot, frame the bridge behind the trees and shoot through, get on the arch, shoot out of there. It's small, it's accurate, it's just something a bit different to what you would get from your mobile phone. And it can capture action quite nicely if you've got enough bright sunlight around to give it a chance to choose a shutter speed that's high enough to freeze the action. The dog charging out of the surf just here. Again, a situation where it's small enough to just throw in a pocket, stick it in your coat and enjoy. This is another contrast image. The beautiful little contrast between the white grass, the shadows, the footprints in the sand. A little bit of street photography to finish up on this one, catching the reflection of the lamp just there, the boot stamping in the puddle. It's just a fun little thing. You can walk around, no one even notices you're out there with the camera. This is one of my favourite cameras of all time because it's just so versatile, so small, so usable and so sharp. I think I will always have an Olympus XA knocking around somewhere because it fits in any pocket and it takes great pictures with lots of character. It may not be as sharp and defined as a brand new Sony, Canon or Nikon, but what it does take is a nice picture that you want to look at as a memory or as a bit of art. Like this, finishing up with the castle. It's just a standing in the street shot of a castle with a bit of foreground detail, but that's just so much more interesting than if it was shot on a modern camera. There's just something about it. I really like it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope this has been vaguely interesting, and join me again next time when we talk about some other cameras and maybe some more lenses.